December 2nd. While many families in the UK were opening the second door of their Advent calendars and looking forward to the upcoming holidays, a verdict was handed down in a courtroom in Scotland that cut deeper than the frost on the streets. On that day in 2008, Peter Tobin was found guilty of the murder of 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton, a man who had hidden behind multiple identities, who had mingled with the homeless and sought shelter in churches, but whose true identity was that of a serial killer. What began with a single body found in a chapel turned out to be the gateway to an abyss that even experienced investigators could hardly comprehend. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnston, Scotland, the youngest of 8 children. He was considered difficult from an early age. At the age of 7, his parents sent him to boarding school, but this did not improve his behavior. Shortly thereafter, he was admitted to a reformatory. What exactly led to this remains unclear, but those who later analyzed his life spoke of early signs of disturbed impulse control, lying behavior, and a lack of remorse. After his time in the institution, Peter moved to Brighton, England. There, as a young man, he met 17-year-old Margaret Mountney. She was a typist, friendly, trusting, and impressed by his charm. They married in August 1969. But soon the attractive man turned into a controlling tyrant. Peter beat her, isolated her, and controlled her every move. When he was arrested shortly afterwards for theft and forgery and sentenced to prison, Margaret filed for divorce. It was the first documented breakup, one of many. In 1973, he married again. Sylvia Jeffries, a 30-year-old nurse, fell in love with his outward gentleness. Their son Ian was born that same year. A year later, a daughter was born, Claire, but the baby died shortly after birth. This marriage was also marked by violence and intimidation. Sylvia left him in 1976 with her son in her arms and fear in her heart. Then things quieted down around Peter for a while, but not because he had changed. It was because no one knew exactly where he was. It was not until years later, when he was in his 40s, that he reappeared, this time with Kathy Wilson. She was 16, vulnerable, and easily influenced. He was significantly older than her. The two began a relationship, moved in together, and had a child, Daniel. They married in 1989, but with their new life, the old patterns returned: control, isolation, violence. Kathy was no longer allowed to go out alone. Every step had to be approved. It was a life in a cage. At the end of the 1990s, Kathy managed to escape with her son. Whether her departure was the trigger or just the last straw is unclear. But from that moment on, Peter Tobin began to finally shed his social mask. What he had kept hidden until then now came pouring out uncontrollably. In February 1991, a young girl disappeared, Vicky Hamilton, 15 years old. She had traveled to Bathgate to visit her sister Sharon. It was the first time she had traveled alone by bus, a little adventure. For Vicky, it was something special, a journey into independence. On February 10th, a cold, snowy Sunday evening, she stood at the bus stop across from the police station with a bag of chips in her hand. She had made sure she had enough money for the ride. Her sister had explained how to get to the bus, hugged her, and wished her well. And then she was gone. No one saw Peter Tobin drag her into his car. No one heard her screams. No one had any idea that 2 lives would intersect in the most horrific way that night. He raped her. He murdered her. Why exactly? We can only speculate. To silence her, out of pure malice. One thing is certain: he kept her handbag. When Vicky didn't arrive at her mother's house, the family immediately began searching for her. The police were called. Her face appeared on posters, in newspapers, on television. It became one of the largest search operations in Scottish history. Thousands of tips, countless interviews. But no one knew that she was already dead, and that her killer had long since moved on. The days after Vicky's disappearance were marked by hope and fear. Her family called hospitals, searched parks, spoke to friends, printed flyers. The police questioned passengers, bus drivers, neighbors. It all seemed like a tragic misunderstanding. A teenager who had perhaps stayed out too late with friends or run away. But Sharon, Vicky's sister, insisted that wasn't like her. Vicky was reliable, punctual, and she was looking forward to returning to her mother. Investigators began checking the area around the bus stop. The fact that she disappeared directly opposite a police station was a cruel coincidence, or perhaps the very reason why no one suspected anything. Who would expect an attack there? But Peter Tobin knew how to remain unobserved. He was experienced, manipulative, and dangerous. He left Scotland shortly after the murder. He traveled to the southeast of England, to Margate, a quiet seaside town. There he rented a house with a garden in a neighborhood where no one asked too many questions. He was the man with the little boy who sometimes played in the sandbox on weekends and occasionally pottered around the garden in sweatpants and flip-flops. What no one knew was that beneath that sandbox, carefully poured, covered with concrete slabs and soil, lay Vicky's body, wrapped in bags, stashed away, forgotten. The neighbors thought he had built a play area for his 3-year-old son, a harmless father. No one asked any questions. No one looked any closer. At the same time, Peter laid a false trail. On February 21, 1991, 11 days after Vicky's disappearance, her purse was found in Edinburgh at the central bus station. The police suspected that the girl wanted to travel to London, perhaps had run away. The investigation shifted from Scotland to England, from a possible crime to a suspected runaway case. It was exactly what Peter had intended. He had planted her belongings there, deliberately, to gain time, to mislead investigators, and it worked. For weeks, the police searched in the wrong direction. Clues were followed, leads investigated, but nothing led to her. And then came what no one said out loud, but many thought maybe she didn't want to be found. Maybe she was just another teenage girl who had had enough of family problems, her parents' divorce, the move, the new school. It fit the picture, at least on paper, but Sharon knew better, and so did Vicky's mother. They didn't believe she had run away, but they had no proof, just a feeling that eventually turned into grief. A few months later, Vicky's mother died. Her death was never fully explained to the public. Some said she couldn't bear the uncertainty. Others said her heart was too weak. But anyone who heard Sharon years later knew that she had died wondering what had happened to her daughter. In the years that followed, Vicky's face remained on missing persons posters. Newspapers regularly reminded readers of her, especially on anniversaries. The police opened and closed the case several times. There were over 7,000 names in the investigation files, over 3,800 statements and almost 500 investigation documents, and yet there was no hot lead. Peter Tobin. His name never came up. He lived inconspicuously, moved around, worked here and there, sometimes with false papers, and always under the radar. To the authorities, he was a petty criminal, but not a sex offender, not a murderer, not yet. Because Vicky wasn't the only victim. Early August 1991, life was pulsating in the fields of Hampshire and southern England. Thousands of young people had flocked to the music festival, which brought new faces, new songs, and new stories every year. For many, it was a weekend of freedom. This was also true for Dinah McNichol, 18 years old, from Essex. She was a smart, fun-loving young woman on the verge of a new chapter in her life. She had just graduated from high school. Torn between wanderlust and career aspirations, she was considering whether to travel for a year or start college right away. She hadn't received any answers from universities yet, so everything was still up in the air, and the festival was the perfect escape from the waiting. That's where she met David Tremlett. The two hit it off immediately. It was one of those fleeting, summery encounters that can feel intense and eternal. On Sunday, August 4th, they slept together in a tent. The next morning, they took it down, said goodbye, and decided to hitchhike part of the way back together. They stood at the side of the road, tired but in good spirits. Then a car stopped. An older man, friendly and calm. It was Peter Tobin. He offered them a ride. David got out first. Dinah stayed. And that's when her nightmare began. What exactly happened in the hours that followed has never been fully clarified. But one thing is certain. Dinah never made it home. Peter had lured her into a trap. He tied her up and gagged her with her own handkerchief. He raped her, and he killed her, just as he had done to Vicky, with cold, calculated precision. But this time, his plan was riskier. Dinah was firmly rooted in her life. She had family, friends, and a stable environment. She wouldn't just disappear without someone immediately asking questions. When she didn't come home, her parents started searching for her. And then something happened that confirmed their worst fears. Withdrawals from Dinah's account were recorded at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex in the days after her disappearance. Her family knew immediately it couldn't have been Dinah. She was thrifty. She would never have withdrawn so much money for no reason, and certainly not so aimlessly. The police began investigating. But as with Vicky, there was no body, no clues. And Peter? He had already moved on. The man who seemed to meet young women by chance was not traveling randomly. He was searching, and he knew how to disappear. The search for Dinah went on for 2 months, without success. Her relatives lived in a state of fear, anger, and quiet hope. But with each passing day, it became clearer that she would not return. For Peter Tobin, life went on, unnoticed, unrecognized, free. On August 4th, 1993, exactly 2 years after Dinah McNichols disappeared, Peter Tobin was tempted again. This time it was an apartment in Lee Park, Hampshire. Inconspicuous, functional, a place no one would associate with a crime. But behind those walls, something was happening that would change the lives of 2 girls forever. 2 14-year-old schoolgirls were out that afternoon visiting a friend. The woman was not at home. Instead of turning back, they went to the next door, Peter Tobin's. Whether out of curiosity, good faith, or a harmless request, they knocked. He opened the door. A polite man, calm, friendly. A little boy, his son, was playing in the apartment. Everything seemed normal. According to later statements, it was also possible that the girls had responded to an ad for a babysitter. Tobin had allegedly been looking for help, and the two believed they were responding to a harmless request. The atmosphere was relaxed until the door closed behind them. As soon as they were inside, the mood changed. Tobin transformed. He pulled out a knife, tied up the girls, and forced them to drink alcohol. Then the nightmare began. He beat them, threatened them, and raped them. One of the girls was particularly badly injured. The pain, the fear, the helplessness were overwhelming. But then, a coincidence, his son woke up. The little boy ran through the hallway. That quiet, clumsy sound that would normally melt any parent's heart stopped Tobin in his tracks. For a moment, he wasn't the perpetrator. He was a father who feared his cover had been blown. What if the child had seen something? What if he had spoken? Peter stopped what he was doing. He quickly got his son out of the apartment. But before he left, he turned on the gas in the kitchen. Maybe he hoped to undo what had happened through explosion, fire, destruction. Maybe he wanted to destroy himself and all the evidence. Maybe it was a last cowardly attempt to cover his tracks. But his plan failed. The girls came to. Injured, shocked, but alive. They managed to free themselves and go to the police. There they told everything. Their statements were clear. The man they described was Peter Tobin. But Tobin had long since gone into hiding. He took his son to his mother and disappeared. A few days later, he reappeared, under a new name. Pat McLaughlin, he now called himself, a seemingly broken, remorseful man seeking refuge with a religious community in Coventry. The Jesus Fellowship took him in. In his new role as a devout outsider, he found the perfect cover, but this time he wasn't quick enough. The media had his face, BBC Crime Watch broadcast his picture, tips came in. Finally, a vehicle was traced back to him. The search ended on May 18, 1994, in Brighton, after 40 days on the run. Peter Tobin was arrested there. He pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting the two girls and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. For the public, the chapter was closed. A perpetrator had been caught. A criminal was behind bars, but no one, not even the police, had any idea that Tobin's darkest chapters were yet to be written. In 2004, Peter Tobin was released from prison early. It was a decision that many would later criticize. A convicted violent criminal, registered sex offender with a known propensity for deception and manipulation, free again, without any public warning. He returned to Scotland, where his name appeared in relevant registers, but he remained under the radar. The trail went cold. Where he lived, what he did, no one knew for sure. Until the summer of 2006, when a small church in the heart of Glasgow became the scene of one of the most shocking discoveries in British criminal history. Tobin showed up at the door of St. Patrick's Church, run down, unshaven, with a story like many others. He was homeless, sick, looking for something to eat and a place to sleep. The parishioners took pity on him. They offered him help, clothes, food, a place to sleep. To most, he was just Pat McLaughlin, an old man with a broken gaze. But beneath the facade lay a plan. He knew that churches often provide a special refuge for the needy, but also for criminals. No one asked questions when someone spent the night in the sacristy. No one checked if or when anyone came or went. Tobin took advantage of this mercilessly. In the church, he met Angelica Kluck. She was a 23-year-old student from Poland who had come to Glasgow during the summer holidays to earn some money. She helped out in the church, cleaning and doing odd jobs. She was friendly, helpful, and trusting. That's exactly what made her a target for Tobin. He spoke to her, asked for help painting the old barn. She agreed. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, they worked together for hours. Some parishioners saw the two of them together. It seemed harmless. But then Angelica disappeared. She didn't come home for dinner. Her roommate was worried. People asked around. They searched the area. Nothing. That night, the Browns, who lived in the high-rise across from the church, heard a strange scream. Lika Brown later described it as short but piercing, as if someone was being violently silenced. She got up, looked out the window, but couldn't see anything, and she didn't think anything of it. But Angelica was already trapped and helpless at that point. Tobin had ambushed her in the chapel, raped her, abused her, and finally killed her. Then he hid her body under the floorboards, right next to the confessional, a place that stands for forgiveness. The symbolism was cruel, but he had made a mistake. Too many people had seen him with Angelica in the days before, and when the police began questioning people the next day, his name came up immediately. Pat, the old man, the one who was always helpful. But Pat was no longer there. Tobin had disappeared. The police began digging, literally. On September 29th, they found Angelica's body. The news shook not only the community, but the whole of Great Britain. A young woman, dead, buried in a church, and the man who had lived among them was suddenly a wanted man, a name that would soon be known throughout the country: Peter Tobin. The discovery of Angelica's body under the church floor shocked not only the city of Glasgow. The fact that a registered sex offender had been posing as a janitor under a false name and then brutally murdered a young woman was a scandal. Public pressure on the police was enormous. Investigator David Swindle, who joined the investigation, was convinced that this was not an isolated case. The brutality with which Angelica was killed suggested years of practice. And Tobin's background was too murky. Swindle wanted to know, what had this man been doing in the years before? While the search for Tobin was in full swing, he went into hiding in London, in a hospital. There, he pretended to be James Kelly, supposedly a paramedic. He complained of chest pains, numbness, weakness. It was all just a pretext. But Dr. Nick Lasso, who examined him, became suspicious. The symptoms did not match the test results. In addition, the man avoided eye contact. When a nurse recognized the face of the alleged patient on the news, it was clear they were dealing with the most wanted man in the country. On September 30th, 2006, Tobin was arrested. Officially, this was initially only for violating the reporting requirements for sex offenders, but the investigators used the time to their advantage. DNA traces at the crime scene matched Tobin's profile. His fingerprints had also been found in the church. The evidence was overwhelming. In March 2007, the trial for Angelica's murder began. Tobin pleaded not guilty and claimed that the sex with Angelica had been consensual. It was a last-ditch attempt to deny responsibility, but the court did not believe him. After a 6-week trial, he was found guilty of murder, rape, and misleading the authorities. The sentence, life imprisonment, with the earliest possible parole after 21 years. For many, it was too lenient, but investigator Swindle had long since come up with a bigger plan. He founded Operation Anagram, a cross-border investigation unit tasked with reconstructing Tobin's entire life. The goal was to compare missing persons with his whereabouts. Because one thing was clear, a man who kills so cold-bloodedly has probably killed before. The officers discovered 2 places that were particularly interesting, Bathgate and Margate. Tobin had lived there in the 1990s. And 2 young women had disappeared without a trace there, Vicky Hamilton and Dinah McNichol. In the summer of 2007, investigators began searching Tobin's old house in Margate. At first, they found nothing until they examined the sandbox in the garden. Neighbors recalled that Tobin had allegedly built it for his son. But under the ground, investigators discovered plastic bags. Inside, human remains. The forensic investigation revealed there were 2 female bodies, and there was something else. A handbag was found nearby, which Tobin had apparently kept. A disturbing trophy. DNA analysis confirmed that the body was that of Vicky Hamilton, who had been missing since 1991. Shortly afterwards, the second body was also identified. Dinah McNichol, who had disappeared after a music festival. 2 families who had waited 16 years for answers finally learned the truth. On December 2, 2008, Tobin was sentenced to another life sentence for the murder of Vicky Hamilton. And on December 16, 2009, the 3rd conviction came, life imprisonment for the murder of Dinah McNichol. 3 victims, 3 verdicts, 3 life sentences. But was that all? Or did Tobin have more lives on his conscience? The police suspected that Tobin was responsible for far more murders than could be proven against him. Some estimates spoke of up to 40 possible victims. But only what could be forensically proven could be proven. Many clues had been covered up, bodies never found or misidentified. And Tobin? He remained silent. He never showed remorse. He revealed nothing. He soon became a symbol in the public eye of the failure of the authorities, who had lost track of him several times. How could a man who had already been convicted of rape be released? Peter Tobin died on October 8, 2022, at the age of 76, in a prison hospital in Edinburgh. An exact cause of death was not released, but it is known that he had been suffering from various illnesses for some time.